In my previous life, the neighbor's child playing with firecrackers started a fire, and our family of 3 perished in the flames. The neighbor claimed the child was too young to understand, and there was nothing they could do. Soon after, they moved away, and our 4 elderly parents died one after another from overwhelming grief. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to half a month before the fire. This time, I would make them pay in blood. I had died once, not the kind you see in movies where you close your eyes and it's over, but the kind where smoke slowly fills your lungs until you suffocate to death. The smoke that day was a grayish yellow, like a thick quilt, squeezing in through the crack under the door. It first spread across the floor, then slowly curled upward. I lay by the door, my nails digging into the doorframe, desperately trying to claw my way down. The door opened outward, but it had been locked from the outside. I didn't know who locked it, and to this day, I still don't. All I remember is carving 10 grooves into the wood with my fingers, my fingernails torn off completely, exposing pink flesh underneath, but by then, I couldn't feel the pain anymore. What was pain? Pain was nothing compared to hearing my 7-year-old daughter calling for her mother in the next room. I couldn't breathe, but that was nothing compared to her. My daughter's voice was always so clear, her laughter like a bell, but that day, her voice grew hoarser and weaker, until it became a faint, cat-like cry. I wanted to rush over, I wanted to smash the door open, but it was solid wood. I rammed it with my shoulder over a dozen times until my bone cracked, but the door didn't budge. My husband wasn't home. It was a Saturday afternoon, and he had gone to the supermarket to buy groceries, saying he was going to make sweet and sour pork ribs for us. Before he left, he kissed my forehead and said he'd be back in 40 minutes. He didn't even make it to 40 minutes, half an hour later, the fire broke out. It was started by the youngest son of our neighbor, Sister Sue, playing with firecrackers. Her son was named Sue Howe, and he was 9 years old that year. 9 years old isn't young. My 7-year-old daughter already knew how to tie her own shoelaces, but Sister Sue always said her son was still too young to understand, that boys were just naturally mischievous that year. Just before the spring festival, Sue Howe somehow got his hands on a string of large red firecrackers, the kind with 10,000 bangs, coiled up as big as a washbasin. He set them off in the hallway, on his balcony, and at the entrance of our building. The property management came to warn him 3 times, and the neighborhood committee came to advise him twice. Each time, Sister Sue would put on a smile and say, "Okay, I'll talk to him," but as soon as they left, she'd mutter, making a fuss over nothing. Can setting off firecrackers really blow up the building? It didn't blow up the building, but it did burn down our home. The surveillance footage from that day showed Sue Howe lighting a firecracker on his balcony and casually tossing it downstairs. The firecracker landed perfectly in the gap of our air conditioner's outdoor unit. Next to the unit were stacks of old newspapers I had piled up, planning to sell them on Monday. The newspapers caught fire, then the outdoor unit, then the window frame, followed by the curtains, the sofa, and everything else that could burn. When the fire broke in from the balcony, I was taking a nap. My daughter was watching cartoons in her own room. When I woke up choking on smoke, I couldn't see anything in the room. All I could hear was a crackling sound, like bones being crushed one by one. The fire brigade arrived, and the fire was extinguished. No, that's not right. We weren't saved. By the time the fire brigade arrived, my daughter and I were already gone. My husband rushed back, saw the police cordon and billowing black smoke downstairs, and collapsed on the ground right there. He woke up 3 times in the hospital and fell unconscious 3 times. The doctor said it was stress-induced cardiomyopathy. I don't know how the days after that were spent. I don't know how my living husband and the 4 elderly relatives got through it. My mother-in-law suffered a cerebral hemorrhage on the day she received the news, spent 7 days in the ICU, and passed away on the 8th day. My father-in-law pulled out his oxygen tube on his own 3 days after her death. My mother already had heart disease. Upon hearing that my daughter and I were gone, she passed away that very night. My father lasted a month, sitting every day on the edge of the flower bed downstairs in front of our building, staring blankly at our windows. A neighbor said that one morning she came, sat there until dark, lowered her head, and never raised it again. All 4 elderly relatives were gone, 7 lives in total. Although my daughter and I were gone, and although my husband didn't die, his soul had been lost. All 4 elderly relatives were gone, and after the incident at Sister Sue's house, she came to the hospital in a pretentious manner, bringing a bag of apples. The apples were from a supermarket discount bag, with 2 rotten ones at the bottom leaking juice that had stained the red plastic bag black. She stood at the door of the ward, never even entering, handed the apples to the nurse, and left. The Next afternoon, reporters came, their cameras focused on the ruins of our home, filming the charred walls and warped window frames. Sister Sue stood in front of the camera, wearing her dark red down jacket, her hair neatly combed. She still had the energy to fix her hair, her eyes were red, but not a single tear fell. When the reporter asked for her thoughts on the matter, she sniffled and said, "We are also deeply pained. But the child is young and doesn't understand. As adults, there's nothing we can do." We did try to persuade him, but he wouldn't listen. Outside the ICU, in the hospital corridor, her husband said to my husband, word for word, "We also bear some responsibility for your family. Why did you pile newspapers on the balcony? If those newspapers hadn't been piled there, the fire wouldn't have started." My husband, who was then covered in tubes, heard this, and his heart rate immediately spiked to 180. Nurses rushed in and spent 20 minutes resuscitating him before he stabilized. The next day, their family moved out, not just moving, but fleeing. At midnight, they called a box truck and emptied the house of all valuable items, even taking the mop from the balcony. The next day, I went to look at their door. My husband went. There was an A4 sheet taped to the door with 4 printed characters, "House for sale." They vanished, like a drop of water melting into the sea, evaporating completely. Their phone lines were disconnected. They blocked us on WeChat. And all relatives in their hometown gave a unified story that they didn't know where they had gone. The blood debt of 7 lives in our family was thus left without even a place to seek justice. Later, my husband sued them in court, but the court said they needed the defendant's accurate address to file the case. He went to the police station, but they said it was a civil dispute and suggested pursuing legal procedures. I went to the neighborhood committee, and the woman, their lip troubled as she said, "Their family has already moved away, and we can't get in touch with them either." Justice, there's no such thing as justice in this world, only the living get to speak. The dead aren't even worth a fart. My husband left a year after the incident, not dead, but completely broken. He's in a nursing home now, doesn't speak, doesn't see anyone, just sits by the window every day, staring blankly. The doctor says it's severe post-traumatic stress disorder. In simpler terms, it's like his soul was ripped out, and what's left is just a body breathing, but only breathing. I know all this because I died, but I never truly left. I don't know how it happened, maybe my obsession was too strong, but I just drifted, watching everything unfold bit by bit, powerless to do anything. I watched as my daughter's last pink hair clip was dug out of the rubble by firefighters and placed in a plastic bag. I watched as the 4 elderly people passed away one by one. I watched as Sister Sue, after that interview, accepted the red envelope the reporter slipped her, then turned and got into her husband's car, smiling just before closing the door. That smile, I'll never forget it. No, I'm already dead, but that smile is etched in my memory forever. She genuinely thought she was in the clear. The child was young, didn't know any better. In her mind, that was the ultimate shield, capable of absolving all sin. Carrying that smile and a heart full of hatred, I drifted in some kind of chaos for who knows how long. Sometimes in a foggy, dark haze, sometimes with fragmented scenes flashing repeatedly. Sister Sue's smile, my daughter's voice, my fingers clawing at the doorframe, my husband's silhouette sitting by the window. They cut back and forth, as if someone had taken scissors to my brain. Then I woke up, not gradually, but suddenly, like being yanked out of water and slammed onto the ground. I gasped, a strange, raspy sound escaping my throat, and my whole body jolted upright in bed. I gasped for air, trying to inhale every bit of it around me. The curtains were light blue, the bedsheets floral, and on the nightstand sat a glass of cold-boiled water next to my daughter's Peppa Pig alarm clock. I glanced at the date on the clock, November 29th. I stared at those numbers for a full minute. November 29th wasn't December 14th, not the day of the fire. 12 days until that inferno. No, later I could calculate it precisely. It was actually 15 days. Sue House set off the firecracker on the balcony at 3:10 p.m. on December 14th. Today is November 29th, 15 days. I've been reborn. I don't know why this happened, and I don't care to find out. All I know is that the suffocating feeling of smoke filling my lungs is still lodged in my throat. The fingers I clawed raw against the doorframe are now perfectly intact on the floral bedsheets, but the pain from that moment still lingers in the marrow of my bones. An inch-by-inch crawl starting under my fingernails, traveling up my fingers, through my wrists, and settling in my heart, where it takes root and burns into a raging fire. I sat on the bed, slowly, ever so slowly, clenching my fists until my nails dug into my palms. A sharp, real sting came from my palms. This was a sensation only the living could feel. Feeling pain meant I was still alive. Being alive was good. Being alive meant that everything hadn't happened yet, that I still had a chance. I threw off the covers and got out of bed. My legs were weak. I walked into the living room and saw a plate of leftover dumpling wrappers on the dining table, my daughter's school bag was thrown crookedly onto the sofa, and the TV remote had fallen onto the carpet. Sunlight streamed in through the balcony's glass doors, falling onto the floor in a large, warm patch. Everything was still here, everything could still be saved. I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time. I heard the bubbling sound of my husband cooking porridge in the kitchen and my daughter humming in the bathroom while brushing her teeth. The muffled tune was the theme song from Paw Patrol. My eyes suddenly burned, but I didn't cry. I forced back the scalding emotion, tilted my head up, and blinked hard. Who was I crying for? What was there to cry about? Now was not the time to cry. In my past life, I had cried enough, my daughter had cried enough, my entire family had cried enough. This time, it was someone else's turn to cry. In my past life, they had easily swept aside 7 lives with the 7 words, "The child is young and doesn't understand." This time, I would use 15 days to make them understand what it means to repay blood with blood. I walked into the kitchen and hugged my husband's waist from behind. He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with that gentle smile. "Awake, the porridge will be ready soon. Go call your daughter to wash her hands," I said. "Okay," my voice so calm that it surprised even me. On my way to the bathroom, I passed the living room window. Our building is L-shaped, my balcony and Sister Sue's balcony next door form a right angle, less than 2 meters apart. Standing there, I glanced through the glass at the neighboring balcony. A few children's clothes were hanging there, along with a string of drying cured meat. In the corner of the balcony, some miscellaneous items were piled up, including a red plastic basin with a piece of colorful, patterned wrapping paper draped over its edge. I saw clearly, it was a firecracker box. It had a bright red background with a golden dragon pattern printed on it, and a line of small text on the side read, "Auspicious Special Red Firecrackers, 10,000 sounds." In my past life, it was this batch of firecrackers. The firecrackers were already at their house. 15 days remained. In those 15 days, that 9-year-old boy would stand on that balcony, light a firecracker, and casually toss it down, thereby destroying everything I had. I stared at that red box, and the corners of my mouth slowly curled upward. If I could have seen my expression at that moment, I probably would have been startled. It was a calm, chilling smile. The me of my past life would never have smiled like that. The me of my past life was an ordinary woman who would greet neighbors, share dumplings with them, and chat about discounted fruits in the homeowners' WeChat group. But people change. After dying once, everything changes. I averted my gaze and went to the bathroom to squeeze toothpaste for my daughter. When she handed me her pink little toothbrush, her chubby little fingers brushed against the back of my hand, soft and warm. I crouched down to look at her. She tilted her head, toothpaste foam still clinging to the corners of her mouth, and gave me a bright-eyed smile. She had lost 2 teeth, and her smile resembled that of a little rabbit. It was these very eyes that, in my past life, had been reddened by smoke before finally closing forever. I kept her small face in my hands and used my thumb to wipe away the toothpaste foam from the corners of her mouth. I whispered softly, "Mommy loves you so much." She replied, "I know, I love Mommy too," and then skipped off to eat her porridge. I stood up and looked at my reflection in the mirror. It was still the same face, early 30s, a few fine lines at the corners of my eyes, and skin that had grown slightly dull from recent late nights. But my eyes were different. They held a raging fire that had not yet ignited. For the next 3 days, I did nothing out of the ordinary. I still took my daughter to school, still went to the wet market to buy groceries, and still hung laundry on the balcony. The only difference was that every time I hung clothes, I cast an extra glance at the neighboring balcony. The firecrackers were still sitting in the corner, untouched. They were likely bought early in preparation for the new year, and since there was still over a month until the holiday, no one would touch them. During these 3 days, I accomplished a few things. First, I spent 2 nights clearing out every potential fire hazard in the house. I packed and threw away all the newspapers, old cardboard boxes, and unused clothes from the balcony into the trash station downstairs. I hired a technician to clean the air conditioner's outdoor unit, ensuring all flammable materials around it were completely removed. I purchased 2 new fire extinguishers, one for the kitchen and one for the bedroom, and installed smoke detectors, placing one in every room. This wasn't because I was afraid of dying, it was to ensure that no matter how the outside world burned, my home would never catch fire. Second, I bought a high-definition camera and installed it in an inconspicuous spot on the exterior of my balcony. The angle was carefully adjusted so that it could capture both my air conditioner's outdoor unit and part of the neighboring balcony. This was a consumer-grade camera, costing less than 400 yuan, capable of storing 15 days of footage. Third, I began keeping a black notebook, palm-sized and convenient to carry with me. I wrote down every piece of information I remembered from my past life, the exact date and time of the fire, Sue Howe's routine, the schedules of Sister Sue and her husband, their license plate number, their hometown address, and the mobile phone numbers of the couple. I had memorized these 2 numbers by heart, because my husband had dialed those numbers thousands of times. The message always remained, "The subscriber you dialed is out of service." I also recorded the names of other reporters who had visited to interview and slipped red envelopes to Sister Sue, the badge number of the police officer who suggested pursuing legal channels, and the name on the ID badge of the neighborhood committee auntie who claimed they couldn't be reached either. I remember every face, every word, every instance of indifference and buck passing. They are carved into my bones. This time, I will let none of them go. Sister Sue's household is the main course, and these people are the side dishes, since it is a blood debt to be repaid in blood. We will settle the principal and interest together. On the 7th day, I encountered a person. It was a Friday afternoon, just past 4 o'clock. I went to the gate of the residential compound to pick up a package. Passing by the central garden, I saw a group of aunties square dancing. The speaker volume was not high. Beside them, a man in his 50s sat on a bench, with a small folding stool in front of him. On the stool lay a set of Chinese chess. He was playing against himself, left hand versus right hand. I had already walked past, but when my peripheral vision caught his face, my steps suddenly halted. I had seen this face in my previous life. On the afternoon the fire broke out. Before the fire trucks arrived, the flames had already burned through the balcony windows. Thick black smoke billowed out. The stairwell was filled with panicked neighbors rushing downstairs. But one figure was charging upward against the flow of people. He reached the 4th floor and smashed open my security door with a fire extinguisher. He rushed inside, but he couldn't find us. The living room had completely collapsed from the fire. When he reached the bedroom door, the heat wave pushed him out. His eyebrows and hair were completely singed off, and his face was blistered from the intense heat. This person is Uncle Gu Guan, a retired criminal investigator who had lived in the adjacent building for 7 or 8 years. After the previous fire, he suffered permanent lung damage from inhaling large amounts of thick smoke. He would pant if he walked too fast and cough if he talked for too long. Later, after Sister Sue's family absconded, a neighbor posted in the Honor's WeChat group that Uncle Gu had foolishly tried to be a hero. If you don't have the capability, don't rush in. Now look at the situation. Whose responsibility is it to pay the medical bills? I remembered that person's profile picture and username. That same person later posted in the group, "It's not his family," so I rush in so fiercely. Does he want to make the news? Good people get no good rewards. This is the most realistic thing I witnessed in my past life. I stood by the edge of the garden holding the package box for a while. Uncle Gu was wearing a gray cotton vest. His hair was more than half white, but his back was straight. When playing chess alone, his brows were furrowed, and his fingers tapped on his knees, as if making a significant decision. I walked over to the bench and looked down at his chessboard. Uncle Gu, red has the upper hand in this game. He looked up at me, somewhat surprised, probably not expecting a young person from the compound to initiate conversation with him. He scrutinized me up and down, then smiled. "You know how to play?" "A little bit. My dad taught me." "Come, sit." He shifted over, making room for me on half of the bench. I sat down and played 3 games of chess with him. I won the first game, but I lost the next 2, not because I was throwing them, but because I genuinely couldn't beat him. He placed his pieces very quickly, as if he didn't need to think at all, with every move already calculated in advance. While playing chess, we chatted casually. He asked which building I lived in, and I said, "Building B, Unit 402. He nodded and said, "Unit 402 is the corner unit. The balcony with the flowers faces the corner of the adjacent building, so the lighting isn't very good." Something stirred inside me. He observed his residential community in great detail, a habit born of his profession. After 3 games of chess, it was nearly dark. I stood up to take my leave, but after taking 2 steps out, I turned back and called out to him, "Uncle Gu, let's add each other on WeChat. We can play again when you're free sometime." He paused for a moment, probably thinking that I, a young person, was being overly familiar, but he didn't refuse. He pulled out an old phone with a cracked corner and let me scan his QR code. His WeChat profile picture was the default gray silhouette, and his name was simply Gu Guan. That night, lying in bed, I tossed and turned, repeatedly checking her moments. There wasn't much content. Occasionally, she shared a few health-related articles, with captions like, "Just for your information." However, one article he had recently shared caught my attention: "How to identify fire safety hazards in your residential community. A retired firefighter teaches you step by step." He had shared this article the day before yesterday, with the caption "Useful." He wasn't a firefighter, he was a criminal investigator, yet, he cared about fire safety. In my past life, when he rushed into the burning building, it wasn't because he wanted to be a hero, it was instinct. I thought about it for a long time. What if, in this life, before the fire occurred, I told him everything, a retired veteran detective, if he knew what was going to happen in the future, what could he do? Perhaps far more than I could. Although I have memories, I am just an ordinary woman. I can install a camera on my balcony, but I can't pick someone else's door lock. I can record information, but I can't access someone else's bank statements or investigate the details of illegal transactions, but he can, or rather, his network of connections can. I placed my phone beside my pillow, closed my eyes, and began piecing things together in my mind. Today was the 7th day, 8 days before the fire. I had already cleared all the hazards in my own home, ensuring its safety, but mere defense wasn't enough. Just preventing the fire from reaching my house, was that enough? No, far from it. They didn't kill me, but the 7 lives they owed were still on their ledger. If this debt wasn't repaid, what was the point of being reborn? Moreover, even if I prevented the fire, as long as Suhao continued to recklessly throw firecrackers around, someone would eventually suffer the consequences. There were more than 20 households living in the building, with 1/3 of them being elderly. On the ground floor, which was an open space, a group of children played year-round. In my past life, it was my family that suffered the fire. If I hadn't prepared in advance, this time it could have been someone else's home that burned down, perhaps the elderly couple in their 70s living upstairs, or the young couple next door who had just had a baby. But in this life, neither I nor anyone I know would suffer such a fate. On the morning of the 8th day, after dropping my daughter off at school, I didn't go straight home. Instead, I stopped at the fruit shop near the community gate and bought 3 pounds of sugar, oranges and pomelos. I also picked up 2 cartons of yogurt from the convenience store across the street, putting everything into a red plastic bag. As I walked back toward Building B, instead of entering my own unit, I turned a corner and entered the adjacent one. Sister Sue lived in apartment 401, separated from mine by just one wall. My heart pounded as I climbed the stairs, not out of nervousness, but with the same intensity as a hunter closing in on prey. My fingers gripped the plastic bag tightly, my palms sweating slightly, but my mind was cold, colder than ever before. Standing outside 401, I took a deep breath and knocked 3 times. Inside, I heard the sound of slippers shuffling toward the door. Sister Sue had just gone out to buy some fruit, and since she bought too much to finish, she offered some to Hao. As she said, "Oh, no need to be so polite." She took the bag from me. Glancing inside, she noticed the yogurt and her eyes lit up. Hao loves this yogurt the most. Thank you, but don't come in, we're busy in the morning, let's catch up another day." I waved my hand and turned to leave. As I went downstairs, the corners of my mouth slowly relaxed. There was nothing added to those 2 cartons of yogurt. I was just delivering fruit, that was all. But this knock confirmed 3 things for me. First, she was alone at home during the day. Her husband had gone to work. Second, a large pile of colorful packaging boxes was spread out on the coffee table in the living room. They weren't firecrackers, but small boxes of sparklers and snap pops. Her son didn't just have 1 roll of firecrackers, he had stockpiled a bunch of other things too. Third, the security door lock at her place was an old-fashioned cross lock, just like mine, which could be pried open by sliding a stiff card into the gap between the door and the frame. I wasn't going in to steal anything, I just needed to know if, one day, I had to go in and do something, whether I could get in. Yes, I could. On the afternoon of the 9th day, I went to the city god temple. Behind the temple, there was a small alley with 3 or 4 small shops selling incense, candles, and joss paper. 2 of them also sold fireworks and firecrackers in winter. The shops were small, packed to the brim, and filled with the smell of sulfur. I entered a shop called Jisheng Firecracker Store. The owner was a balding old man wearing a blue cloth apron stained with soot. Seeing me come in, he lazily lifted his chin and asked, "What kind of firecrackers do you want?" "The big rolls of 10,000 bang firecrackers, the ones with red packaging over there." He pointed to the corner. I walked over and looked. The packaging was exactly the same as the roll on the balcony next door to my house. Jisheng special red firecrackers with golden dragons on a bright red background, the 5 characters embossed in gold foil. I crouched down, picked up a roll, and weighed it in my hand. It felt heavy. "Boss, my husband asked me to buy firecrackers, but he said they need a fuse that burns especially fast, because it's more satisfying to set off. Do you have any with modified fuses?" The old man glanced at me over his reading glasses, his eyes showing a hint of wariness. "How fast do you want the fuse to burn?" "One that explodes as soon as it's lit." He said that when he was a kid, The fuses on the firecrackers he played with were particularly long, taking forever to burn, which wasn't satisfying at all. The old man was silent for 2 seconds, probably trying to figure out my intentions, but he might have thought that a woman wouldn't be up to anything suspicious. He turned around, took a small bundle of gray string from a drawer under the counter, and said, "This is a fast-burning fuse, 8 times faster than a normal one. A normal fuse takes 2 or 3 seconds to burn one section. But this one zips through in 0.3 seconds. It's easy to install. Just pull out the original fuse and insert this one." He paused, lowering his voice. "But I don't dare sell this. If something happens to you, it'll be trouble. If you want it, I can only give you the regular kind, and you'll have to replace it yourself when you get back." "Do you sell regular fuses here?" "Yes, by the meter." I bought 10 meters of regular fuse and a large reel of 10,000 firecrackers, paid, and walked out carrying them. After returning home, I placed the 2 items on the coffee table and stared at them for a long time. Although I had managed to get the fuse, I didn't buy it from that shop. After the old man refused to sell it to me, I went to the shop at the very end of the alley. The shopkeeper, a woman in her 50s, hesitated for a moment when I gave her the same story, then took the money and handed it over. This kind of thing isn't contraband, no one checks, and no one takes it seriously. Every year, during the Spring Festival, there are news stories about people modifying firecrackers themselves, injuring their fingers or blinding their eyes. It happens every year, but no one ever does anything about it. I pinched the gray fast-burning fuse between my fingers. It was a bit thinner than regular fuse, felt slightly rough to the touch, and when I brought it closer, I could smell a faint hint of gunpowder. What does 0.3 seconds mean? It means the firecracker will explode before you even have time to pull the lighter away from your hand. Suhao is 9 years old this year, and his fingers wouldn't be able to withstand it either. 0.3 seconds. I placed the fuse in a sealed bag, sealed it, and tucked it into the bottom drawer of the wardrobe. Over the next 2 days, I did something that all the neighbors noticed. I started praising Suhao. No, not just praising. I started hyping him up. The 12th day was a Saturday. A temporary children's fair had been set up in the central garden of the residential complex, organized by the property management. There were a few balloon arches, 3 or 5 stalls, and a bunch of kids running around. When I took my daughter to play, I saw Sister Sue had also brought Suhao. He was wearing a blue down jacket, clutching a handful of snap poppers in his hand. Every few steps, he'd throw one on the ground. Pop. An elderly woman with her grandson nearby was startled and frowned, muttering, "Whose child is so mischievous?" Sister Sue heard it but pretended not to, rolling her eyes slightly. I watched from the side. When the right moment came, a group of parents were gathered chatting. I walked over with my thermos cup and deliberately raised my voice a little. "Oh, look, Sister Sue's how is so full of energy, so brave. Boys these days really need that kind of spirit to grow up successful." As soon as Sister Sue heard this, her face lit up with joy. She humbly replied, "Oh, not at all. He's just mischievous. It's good for boys to be mischievous. What boy isn't? If they weren't, they'd be like wooden dolls." I continued, my voice just loud enough for the nearby parents to hear, looking at Hao's courage. "He'll either become a soldier or a leader when he grows up. What ordinary kid would dare set off firecrackers like him? Look at his posture, not afraid at all. That's not something you can teach, it's natural bravery." A bespectacled mother nearby opened her mouth as if to say something, glanced at Sister Sue, and swallowed her words. Suhao got even more excited when he heard me praising him. He immediately opened a new box of snap poppers and started throwing them on the ground. Pop, 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 7 or 8 in a row. The deafening noise scared a toddler who had just learned to walk into crying, wailing so hard his voice cracked. The bespectacled mother finally couldn't hold back and said softly, "Could you please keep it down? This is a public space." Before Sister Sue could respond, I jumped in first. "Oh, come on, it's just kids having fun. It's not like this happens every day. We adults should be more tolerant. This neighborhood is so small. If we don't let the kids play here, where else can they go? Besides, what's wrong with Hao setting off poppers? It's perfectly normal for boys." As I spoke, I suppressed the disgust from my past life, every word that came out of my mouth sounding as if Sister Sue herself were speaking through me. These were the exact words she had used in my past life. Except back then, others had confronted her, and she had shot back with these lines. This time, I was saying them for her, nailing her firmly to her own rhetoric. Sister Sue naturally picked up where I left off. Following my lead, she said, "That's exactly what I was thinking. Boys need to roughhouse a little to grow up. Some people are just too sensitive, always trying to control everything." The bespectacled mother's face turned grim. She stood up, took her child, and left, muttering, unreasonable under her breath as she walked away. I didn't respond. Instead, I took a sip from my thermos and glanced sideways at Sister Sue. She was bending down to wipe her son's runny nose, her face glowing with maternal affection. Suhao impatiently shook his head, and one of the snap poppers in his hand fell to the ground. Sister Sue bent over to pick it up and handed it back to him. Just then, a property management staff member walked over, a young woman in her 20s wearing a red vest. She spoke timidly. "Ma'am, it's best not to let your child play with snap poppers at the garden party. There are many children around, and it's easy for someone to get hurt. Besides, the security guard has already mentioned that it's better not to set them off in the neighborhood." Sister Sue's smile froze for a moment, and just as she was about to retort, I cut in ahead of her. "Oh, sweetie, that's not quite right," I said with a smile. My tone polite but my words anything but. The garden party is for the kids to have fun. Their happiness is what matters most. Rules are meant to serve the children, not the other way around. Our How loves setting off poppers. It's his hobby. Isn't that right, Sister Sue? I winked at Sister Sue, and she immediately caught on. Puffing out her chest, she raised her voice half an octave higher than mine and said to the property management girl, "It's not like my son is setting off bombs. Do you property management people have nothing better to do than obsess over this? Why don't you spend your time cleaning the hallways instead?" The girl's face turned pale. She stammered, okay, and walked away with her head down. I watched her retreating figure without a shred of sympathy in my heart. The property management had already come to persuade Sister Sue before, 3 times in total. On the 3rd visit, Sister Sue promised right to their faces that she would never let her son set off firecrackers in the neighborhood again, but as soon as they turned around, she cursed them for meddling in other people's business. A week later, my house caught fire. Now, I want to make him stand in front of everyone and amplify, one by one, every self-righteous word he said in his previous life, making each one come true. If anything happens in the future, don't forget, these are all things you said with your own mouth. As the garden party was about to end, I did one last thing. I took a box out of my bag, walked over to Suhao, crouched down, and said, "How, Auntie has a gift for you." It was a box of fireworks, the kind I specifically bought from that shop near the city god temple. The packaging was particularly flashy, with a golden shell printed with superhero patterns, exactly the kind that would make a little boy's eyes light up, but what was inside was actually quite ordinary, just small fireworks, the kind you hold with a stick that sparkles when lit. As soon as Suhao saw the packaging, he squealed with excitement and reached out to grab it. Sister Sue stood nearby, smiling, and said, "Aren't you going to thank Auntie? Say thank you, Auntie." Suhao shouted a thank you, tore open the box, and examined the contents over and over. "But how, these fireworks should only be set off in an open space, not on the balcony." I deliberately paused, using a playful tone. "But you're so brave, I'm sure you know where to set them off, right? You're the bravest kid in the neighborhood. Auntie believes in you." Suhao puffed out his chest and said loudly, "I know, I'll set them off downstairs." "Good boy," I said, patting his head. I stood up, smiled at Sister Sue, and walked away with my daughter. After walking a few steps, my daughter looked up at me, her little brow furrowed, and said, "Mom, Suhao is so noisy. I don't like him." I tightened my grip on her small hand and didn't look back. When we got home, my daughter was watching cartoons in the living room, and my husband was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, the knife thudding rhythmically, the oil in the pan sizzling with heat. I stood on the balcony, less than 2 meters away, looking at the large pot of cured meat and the pile of bright red firecrackers in the corner of the neighbor's balcony. Today is the 12th day. There are 3 days left. At 11:30 that night, the lights in the entire building were almost all off. I changed into dark-colored sportswear and sneakers, stuffed the prepared items into a black canvas bag, and went out. I took the elevator down to the 1st floor, first exited the unit door, confirmed that no one was around, and then re-entered the door of Sister Sue's unit next door. I was confident that there were many people in the garden today. On the way back, I saw her door slightly ajar, and it closed with a click, but I saw the lock cylinder model clearly, just as I guessed, an old-style cross-lock, with a pretentious circle of reddish-brown casing and springs inside, the simplest A-grade lock cylinder. With this kind of lock, you can insert a hard plastic card into the door gap, press against the shoe surface, and with a forceful twist, the spring pops open. My husband used to work in a hardware store for 2 years. He taught me, not how to pick locks, but how to remove old locks when replacing them. The principle is the same. I pulled out a PVC card cut into a specific shape from the canvas bag, stood in the dark hallway, and slid the card into the door gap. My hand was steady. It wasn't that I wasn't nervous. I had practiced. I practiced on my own door for an entire afternoon. dismantling and reassembling it until I could find the right angle even with my eyes closed. With a click, the lock opened, I slipped sideways into the door, closed it behind me with my backhand, and stood in the entryway listening for 5 seconds. The sound of a TV came from the living room, and snoring came from the direction of the bedroom. During the day, I had checked the sliding door to the balcony. It was never locked. Tiptoeing over, I pushed it open a little and stepped onto the balcony. The balcony was piled with things. In the red basin under the cured meat, that coil of firecrackers was right there. By the streetlight, I could see it clearly. I crouched down in front of the firecrackers, took a small flashlight from the canvas bag, the kind you hold in your mouth, turned it on, and shone it on the coil of firecrackers. The red tubes were tightly arranged in circles, with the fuse extending from the center of the coil. Grayish-white like a thin noodle, I gently ran my hand over it. The texture was slightly hard, an ordinary fuse, that's right. I took out a sealed bag from the canvas bag. Inside was the fast-burning fuse and a small bottle of clear glue. I pulled out the original fuse of the firecrackers, no need to exert force, just slowly and evenly tugging it out. After a faint sizzling friction sound, the entire fuse lay in the palm of my hand, carrying a faint smell of gunpowder. I inserted the fast-burning fuse slowly, afraid it might bend or break. My fingers were as steady as threading a needle. 3-second fuse. Once a lighter gets close, the flame will dart in, and there won't even be time to blink before the entire coil explodes. It took me about 20 minutes to replace all the fuses in the entire coil of firecrackers. I dabbed a bit of glue at the connection points, pressed it with my fingers for 10 seconds to make sure it was firmly attached, rolled up the old fuse I had replaced, and put it in my pocket. I put everything back into the canvas bag. When I stood up, my knees made a cracking sound. I froze for a few seconds. The snoring inside didn't stop. I took one last look at the coil of firecrackers. Under the moonlight, it looked completely normal, still lying quietly in the red plastic basin. No one but me knew that the invisible fuse was now different. After returning home, I changed out of my sportswear and sneakers, stuffed them into the washing machine, and then went to check on my daughter's room. She had kicked off the blanket. One leg hanging off the edge of the bed, her mouth open, drool flowing onto the pillow. I gently moved her leg back onto the bed, pulled the blanket over her, and kissed her forehead. On the morning of the 13th day, I didn't go out. Instead, I stayed home doing chores, mopping the floor, doing laundry, chopping vegetables, and cooking. In the hallway, I ran into Sister Sue. Once, she was carrying trash downstairs, and we politely greeted each other. She called me Shaolin again. I said, "Good morning, Sister Sue." The sun rises as usual, and everything goes on as planned. In the evening, my husband was on the sofa scrolling through his phone. I snuggled up next to him, leaning against his shoulder. While browsing the news, he casually remarked, "It seems like the neighbors are arguing again. I just heard something being thrown." I replied, and didn't say anything more. Arguments next door were a common occurrence. Nothing unusual, but in my past life, after they finished arguing, they were the ones who caused trouble, and we were the ones who suffered. On the 14th day, my daughter came home from school and said her teacher had assigned a craft project, making a small house out of cardboard and colored paper. After dinner, I helped her with the craft on the coffee table. She accidentally stuck the double-sided tape crookedly for the window and got so upset her eyes turned red. I pulled her onto my lap, rested my chin on her head, and said, "It's okay, we can take it apart and start over. Mommy will help you." As she carefully cut the window frame with her little scissors, I caught the scent of strawberry shampoo in her hair. I buried my nose in her hair, and my eyes nearly burned with tears, but this time, I didn't hold them back. Instead, I quietly let one tear fall, just one, onto her hair. She didn't notice. After finishing the craft, I tucked her into bed and turned off the light. I sat by her bedside, not leaving right away. Her breathing gradually steadied, her eyelashes stopped fluttering, and she fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. In my past life, this would have been the last peaceful night. That night in my past life, she had slept just as soundly. Tomorrow at 3:10 p.m., an ordinary fuse will be lit by a little boy with a lighter. The entire string of 10,000 firecrackers will crackle and pop, filling the air with red paper scraps. One firecracker that hasn't fully burned out will be casually tossed downstairs, landing in the gap of my air conditioner's outdoor unit, and then everything will be over. I sat in the dark for 40 minutes, then stood up and gently closed my daughter's bedroom door. Back in the living room, I opened the drawer under the TV cabinet and pulled out an old phone. I'd already switched to a new one, and this was the one I'd replaced last month. The system was still smooth, it could connect to the internet, but the camera had a crack. I flipped the phone over, pried open the case, and pulled out a SIM card from the inner layer. I'd bought this card last month, using a number that had already been deactivated. With this card, I registered a brand new social media account. The profile picture was a sunflower, and the username was Wind Clear and Soaring. I opened the phone's browser, went to the local forum section, and started typing resident of Unit 401, Building B. Allows their 9-year-old son to set off firecrackers recklessly in the residential area. The parent even claims, even if it burns, it's none of anyone else's business. In the post, I listed everything I had personally witnessed, heard, and recorded over the past week, one by one. On such and such date, Suha lit a firecracker in the stairwell on such and such floor and threw it under the shoe cabinet at a neighbor's doorstep. On such and such date, Suha chased a 4-year-old child in the central garden and threw firecrackers at them, causing the child's grandmother to break down in tears on the spot. On what date, Sister Sue told the property management and neighbors, "What's wrong with my son setting off firecrackers? Even if it burns, it's none of your business." Later, an audio clip was attached, recorded on the day of the garden party. Sister Sue's voice was clear. "My son isn't setting off bombs. Is it really that interesting for you property management to obsess over such a small thing all day long?" Finally, a note was added. "I've already reported this matter to the neighborhood committee, and they replied that they are coordinating. I'm writing this post not to vent, but to ask everyone, if someone allows their child to recklessly set off fireworks and firecrackers in a residential area and even declares that it's none of anyone else's business if something burns, what should neighbors do? Please share and offer advice." After checking 3 times to ensure none of my personal information was exposed, I clicked send, turned off my phone, removed the battery, and placed it on the coffee table. Tonight, this post will slowly gain traction. Tomorrow, someone will connect the 2 incidents without me having to say another word. The internet users will speak for me. After finishing all this, I walked to the balcony and pulled back a corner of the curtain. The moon was bright tonight, shining on Sister Sue's balcony and outlining the edge of the red plastic basin with a silver-white glow. The tray of firecrackers lay quietly inside. Tomorrow, Suha would drag it out, carry it to the balcony, and crouch down with a lighter. The moment the flame touched the fuse, no one would have time to stop the fast-burning fuse. From ignition to explosion, the time would be too short to react. In my previous life, a single falling firecracker burned away all the karma of my 7 lives. In this life, it's your turn to hold this one in your own hands. I closed the curtain and returned to the bedroom. My husband was already asleep, his soft snoring rising and falling like the tide. I lay down on my side, closed my eyes, and drifted off. Tomorrow is the 15th day. On the 15th day, I was awakened by the sound of an argument downstairs, not from my own building, but from the downstairs on my phone. The first thing I did upon opening my eyes was to reach for my phone beside the pillow. As the screen lit up, notifications from the local forum were already exploding. The post had been up for 8 hours, with over 170 replies, propped up against the headboard. I scrolled through them one by one. Some said, "OP.R. you exaggerating, what parent would be so brazen?" Then, another neighbor, definitely not my alt account, chimed in, saying they had personally witnessed the child lighting a firecracker in the elevator, nearly causing a pregnant woman to fall to the ground in fright. Someone else added, "This family lives in Unit 401. Last year, when they were renovating, they turned the hallway into a garbage dump. When the property management tried to intervene, the husband cursed them out, calling them dogs." By the time I reached the 3rd page, I saw a comment that had been pushed to the top, with over 500 likes. The comment was only 3 lines long, but I stared at the gray default avatar and the 3-character name, my finger freezing in place. Guguan, neighbors have witnessed it, more than once, saved. I stared at this comment for a long time. He had posted his real name, not a username, not a nickname, just Guguan, a retired police officer, using his real identity on a local forum to support a poster whose true identity was unknown. This man lived his life with a temper forged over a lifetime, and it was something he couldn't change. I put down my phone, got out of bed, and pulled open the curtains. The sky outside was a pale gray, with thick clouds hanging low as if snow was about to fall. The leaves of the plane trees in the residential complex had all fallen, leaving bare branches stretching into the air. Downstairs, a few early rising seniors were walking their dogs, and a garbage truck was rumbling loudly as it reversed. Everything looked exactly as it did on any ordinary day, but today was not ordinary. My phone vibrated with a new message in the homeowners group chat. The official account of the property management office had posted an announcement, the entire text in bold red font. It stated that they had recently received multiple reports from homeowners about minors setting off fireworks and firecrackers within the complex, posing serious safety hazards. The property management had already conducted Door door counseling with the relevant households and would carry out a special fire safety inspection within the week. It urged all parents to strengthen supervision of minors and strictly prohibit the setting off of fireworks and firecrackers within the complex. Once discovered, the property management would directly report the matter to the police. The post was made exactly at 7:00 a.m. This announcement did not name anyone, but everyone knew what it was responding to. Messages in the group immediately began to scroll. Auntie Wang from the 5th floor, it's about time they did something. Last month, a spark from fireworks burned a hole in my balcony screen. Who can I even complain to? 3rd building resident, what's the big deal about kids setting off firecrackers? The property management never does anything useful anyway. Auntie Wang from the 5th floor at 3rd building resident, it wasn't your house that got burned, was it? The bickering in the group didn't require my participation. I had my own things to do this afternoon. As usual, I took my daughter to school. While crouching at the school gate to adjust her scarf, she suddenly cupped my face with her small hands and said, "Mom, you look so pretty today." I replied, "Mom's scarf is the same as always." She said, "No, it's your eyes, they're bright, sparkling pretty." I was taken aback for a moment, then smiled and gave her forehead a firm kiss. Children can see things adults cannot. She might have seen a kind of light, a light called determination. After dropping off my daughter, I went to the fruit shop at the entrance of the complex, not to buy fruit. The shop owner, surnamed Kai, was in her 50s and lived on the 3rd floor below my apartment. Her husband was an electrician for the property management. Sister Kai held most of the interpersonal network of the entire complex in her hands. When I walked in, she was squatting on the floor unpacking strawberries. Seeing me, she smiled, her cheeks flushed red from the cold wind. "Shaolin, you're here so early today," Sister Kai said. "I wanted to ask you something." I also crouched down, pretending to help unpack a couple of boxes of strawberries. "Go ahead, ask Uncle Gu, the one who lives in the next building." Gu Guan, the retired police detective. "Are you familiar with him?" Sister Kai paused her movements, looked up at me, and a subtle glint flashed in her eyes. A signal that her gossip radar had been activated, but she didn't ask further, only saying, "Old Gu, I wouldn't say we're particularly close, but I know about his situation. He lives alone, his wife passed away several years ago, and his son works in Beijing, barely coming back once a year." "Does he interact much with people in the complex?" "Not really. When he first moved here, everyone was a bit afraid of him, thinking he was intimidating because he used to be a detective. Later, they realized he's just quiet and doesn't like to socialize. He often plays chess by himself in the central garden. Seems pretty lonely." Sister Kai neatly stacked the strawberry boxes, then suddenly remembered something. "Hey, why are you asking about old Gu?" "Nothing, really. I played a game of chess with her last time and thought she was really nice. I wanted to play with her again." I spoke casually, pushed the strawberry box back, and stood up. "Thanks, Sister Kai, don't mention it." After leaving the fruit shop, I took out my phone and sent a WeChat message to Gu. "Go in, Uncle Gu, are you free this afternoon? I'd like to play a game with you." After waiting about 5 minutes, he replied with just one word, "Sure." I stared at that word for a few seconds, then exited the chat and opened Douyin. In the search bar, I typed residential firecracker accident, sorted by popularity. The first video that popped up had 23 million views and was posted 3 weeks ago. The video showed surveillance footage from a residential complex during the Spring Festival. A boy setting off fireworks in the hallway, sparks flying into a neighbor's shoe cabinet by the door. 30 seconds later, the entire hallway was filled with thick smoke. The comments section had over 30,000 comments, all of them scathing. I downloaded the video, then opened the second, third, and fourth videos, saving all 4 to my phone. Back at the entrance of my building, I didn't go upstairs right away. Instead, I stood by the flower bed outside, looking up. My balcony and Sister Sue's balcony were less than 2 meters apart. From this angle, I could see clearly. The cured meat on Sister Sue's balcony was still there, and the red plastic basin beside it was also still there. The firecrackers lay quietly in the pale daylight. I took my phone out of my pocket, opened the Notes app, and typed a line, 3:10 p.m., Sister Sue's balcony. After typing that line, I went back inside, moved a chair to the living room, and sat facing the wall clock, waiting minute by minute, second by second. At 2:20 p.m., my husband left for work. I kissed him at the entrance and said, "It's colder today, zip up your jacket." He replied, "Got it." After taking 2 steps, he turned back, pulled a milk candy from his coat pocket, and placed it in my palm. "From work, saved it for you." I stood at the door, clutching the candy, watching him enter the elevator. When the elevator doors closed, the candy in my hand was warm. At 2:40 p.m., I heard the sound of a door opening and closing next door. followed by the chattering of children and Sister Sue's sharp voice calling, "How, put on your slippers." Then came the sound of the TV. I couldn't make out the specifics, but I could tell it was the laughter and applause from some variety show. At 2:55 p.m., the sliding door to the balcony next door slid open with a clatter. Suhao's voice came from the direction of the balcony, full of energy and the impatience and excitement unique to a 9-year-old boy. "Mom, I'm getting the firecrackers. I'll set them off on the balcony." Sister Sue's voice came from inside the living room, muffled and unclear. I couldn't make out what she said, but in my previous life, I'd heard it countless times. "In my previous life," she said, "just don't throw them down." The sliding door to the balcony next door clattered again, left slightly ajar. I stood in the living room, leaning against the wall, breathing steadily. The second hand ticked, and my heartbeat kept pace, matching its rhythm. At 3:07 p.m., I glanced at my phone and sent a WeChat message to Gu Guan. "Uncle Gu, please come to the flower bed next to Building B." He hadn't replied yet, but I was certain he would come. In his past life, he had charged into the fire against the flow of people. In this life, he would inevitably run headfirst into trouble. At 3:09 p.m., the sound of a plastic basin being dragged echoed from the neighboring balcony. The camera I had pre-positioned on the outer side of my balcony was likely recording. That little device captured every move on the opposite balcony, streaming the footage to the cloud. Backups were backed up. I had pre-synced the data to 3 of my own accounts, ensuring it couldn't be lost. At 3:10 p.m., a piercing scream shattered the silence of the entire building. It wasn't the crackling of firecrackers, but a massive explosion. I had replaced the fuse of the 10,000-shot large drum firecracker. That type of fuse doesn't ignite the firecrackers one by one. Instead, at the instant the first one is lit, it detonates all the gunpowder. Simultaneously, the entire drum exploded in less than half a second, like a homemade bomb. Before the roar of the explosion had even faded, Suhao's heart-wrenching wail followed. It was a high-pitched cry only a child could produce, sharp enough to tear through eardrums. There was no anger in it, no grievance, only pure pain and pure terror. It was as if his hand had been bitten by fire, or as if he had seen his own blood. Then came Sujia's scream, her voice instantly overpowering her son's. But it lacked logic. It was pure instinct. A woman's instinctive reaction upon seeing her child injured is usually maternal love, but for her, it was panic. I never doubted that she loved her son deeply, but loving one's own child is not a shield. In her past life, when her son caused the death of another child, she hadn't shared even a fraction of her maternal love. I listened for a while. The wailing continued. Footsteps were chaotic. She was shouting, "Husband, husband, come back quickly." Then, "Call 120, call 120 quickly." Her voice rolled from the living room to the entryway, and back to the balcony, like a headless fly crashing against glass. I waited until the woman's crying and shouting were loud enough to attract the attention of the entire hallway. Then I opened my door. Several neighbors were already standing in the corridor, drawn out by the explosion and the screams. An elderly woman with white hair upstairs was gripping the handrail, looking down, her voice trembling, as she asked, "What's wrong? What's wrong? Did the gas explode?" As I stepped out, my facial expression was one I had practiced in advance, brows furrowed, eyes wide, lips slightly parted, a perfect balance of shock and concern. It couldn't be too exaggerated, nor too subdued. Too exaggerated seemed fake, too subdued seemed cold-blooded. I stood in the corridor, mingling with the neighbors, maintaining the same posture as everyone else, leaning out, making eye contact, whispering among ourselves. Someone knocked and called out, "Sujia, what's wrong?" From inside came Sujia's voice, tinged with tears. Hao's hand was blown up. "Quickly, help me call an ambulance." Another neighbor started making a phone call, while someone else went to press the elevator button. At that moment, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. It was a voice message from Guiguan. I answered the call. His voice was low and steady. "I'm downstairs." "What was that noise just now?" "The firecrackers exploded." "The child from Unit 401, there was a 2-second silence on the other end, 2 seconds of quiet, without even the sound of breathing. Then, the old detective simply said, "I'm coming up." I replied, "Okay," and ended the call. About a minute later, the sound of someone forcefully banging on the iron door echoed in the hallway. The property management staff had arrived, 2 people in gray security uniforms. When the door was opened, panting heavily, Sister Sue's near-roaring shouts erupted from inside. "You property management people are all useless. We asked you to handle safety issues, and you did nothing. Now my son is hurt. Are you satisfied?" Her voice was completely broken, her words fragmented, like shards of glass being thrown in someone's face. The 2 property management staff were stunned by the scolding. They were probably thinking back to when they had come to advise her not to let her child set off firecrackers, and she had yelled at them and chased them out, even throwing in a line, "You must have used this line to shut people up in your past life." my son isn't setting off bombs, and even if something burns, it's none of your business." Now that her son had actually been injured, she was shifting the blame back onto them, as if she had nothing to do with the whole incident from start to finish. I didn't go inside. Instead, I leaned against the wall across the hallway, hands clasped in front of me. Standing with the other neighbors, someone peeked inside, covered their mouth, and whispered to the person next to them, "Blood, blood, blood, it's all over the floor." The elevator dinged open, and Gugoan stepped out. He was wearing a dark blue cotton jacket, zipped all the way up. His hair looked like it had been hastily smoothed with his hands, and his brows were furrowed as his eyes swept across the hallway. Everyone in the corridor looked at me, but he didn't speak to me. Instead, he walked straight to the door of Unit 401 and pushed it open. After stepping inside, there was a moment of silence. Sister Sue probably hadn't expected an old man to suddenly barge in. Then I heard her say something, her voice not loud, but everyone in the hallway heard it clearly. "Stop crying. First, hold the child's hand, bring a towel, quickly." After a while, he carried Suhao out. The child's right hand was wrapped in a white undershirt that had been taken off someone, wrapped in several layers, with the inner layers already half soaked in blood. Suhao's face was ashen, his mouth hanging open, no longer crying loudly but emitting intermittent whimpers. After the high-pitched screams, only hiccup-like sobs remained. His voice was completely gone. When the elevator doors opened again, the ambulance had arrived, and the sounds from downstairs echoed simultaneously. Gugoan carried the child into the elevator. Sister Sue stumbled after him, her face a mess, one slipper missing, her bare foot stepping on the concrete floor of the hallway without seeming to feel the cold. I followed behind. When I picked up the missing slipper and handed it to her, she glanced at me. In that one look, that momentary expression in her eyes, I knew she hadn't recognized anything. In her eyes, I was just Xiaolin, the neighbor next door who would bring fruit and praise her son for being brave. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Thank you." I patted her shoulder and said, "Hurry to the hospital." The elevator door closed. The red floor numbers began to descend. I stood in place, brushing off a bit of dust stuck to my hand. The neighbors in the hallway started to disperse, their murmurs rising and falling. Someone said, "That kid is too mischievous, should have been disciplined earlier." Someone else said, "The mother is also to blame." Someone sighed, "His hand probably can't be saved. Did you see how much blood was flowing just now?" I listened for a moment, then turned and went back to my own home. After closing the door, I didn't turn on the light. Standing in the darkness of the entryway, my back against the door, I let out a long, slow breath, not a sigh of relief, but a confirmation that I could still breathe normally. After doing something so significant, my hands and legs weren't shaking. When I handed Sister Sue her slippers earlier, my fingers were as steady as steel. I glanced up at the wall clock, 3:15. At 3:15 in my previous life, the fire had already started. My daughter should have been calling for me in her room, and I couldn't catch my breath. In this life, at 3:15, I stood in the entryway of my own home. There was no smoke in the air, no smell of burning, only the hum of a vacuum cleaner from upstairs and the scent of soup simmering in someone's home in the distance. The aroma of lotus root and pork ribs drifted through the pipes. I walked to my daughter's room and pushed the door open a crack. The curtains were half drawn, and the afternoon sunlight cut a sharp line of light and shadow across the floor. The bed sheets were pink, and a Peppa Pig blanket was neatly folded at the head of the bed, with a pillow resting upright against it. The entire room was clean and quiet, waiting for her to return from school. My daughter was still alive. The moment this thought hit me, my knees suddenly gave way. Leaning against the doorframe, I slowly crouched down and buried my face in my hands. It wasn't crying, it was some kind of physiological reaction. The tension that had been stretched to its limits suddenly snapped, sending a tremor through my entire body, making my bones hum. I stayed in that position in the darkness of my hands, listening as my heartbeat slowed from a frantic pace back to normal. After a little over a minute, I stood up and went to the bathroom to splash cold water on my face. The person in the mirror looked the same as usual, skin a bit dry, lips pale, but the eyes were still bright. I walked back to the living room and sat down. The footage recorded by my phone's camera should have already been automatically backed up. I opened the cloud storage and clicked on the latest video file, which had been recording since 2:00 p.m. In the footage, Sister Sue's balcony remained calm for nearly an hour, with only the occasional breeze rustling the drying clothes. At 2:34, Suhao appeared on the balcony, crouching beside the red plastic basin. He moved aside the clutter on top, revealing the large red firecrackers underneath. He tried to drag them but couldn't move them at first, so he used both hands to pull the coiled firecrackers out of the basin and placed them on the balcony floor. Around 2:50, he went back inside and returned with a lighter, a blue plastic one. the same kind his mother usually used to light mosquito coils. He crouched beside the firecrackers, fiddling with them for a while, probably trying to find the fuse. From the angle of my camera, I could clearly see his profile. He lowered his head, his left hand pressing down on the coiled firecrackers, his right hand holding the lighter. He brought it close to the fuse, and then a flame flickered to life. I watched the scene 3 times, the first time at normal speed. A burst of white light exploded on the screen, and orange flames surged from beside the firecracker, like a flower that bloomed and vanished in an instant. The second time at half speed, I could clearly see Suhao's right hand being engulfed by a fireball at the moment of the explosion. His body was thrown backward, the lighter flew out, hit the wall, bounced back, and fell to the ground. The third time, I paused frame by frame. I saw that after the explosion, the fingers of his right hand were spread open, but the expression on his face when he looked at his palm wasn't pain, it was blank, the kind of blankness that comes from being completely unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then the pain caught up with his face, shifting from bewilderment to contortion. His mouth opened, and he let out his first howl. I closed the video, made a copy, placed it in an encrypted folder, set a password, deleted all temporary caches from the recycle bin, and then opened the local forum. There were 70 or 80 new replies under that post, but no one had yet connected the afternoon explosion to the thread. It had been less than an hour since the incident, and the news hadn't spread yet, but it would soon. I added an update to the post, just one line, at 3:10 p.m. today. A firecracker explosion occurred in Unit 401, Building B. A child was injured. Parents, please take this as a warning. After posting this update, I logged out of the forum. There was still an unread message on my phone, a notice from my daughter's homeroom teacher in the parent group chat. It said that the school had organized a fire drill that afternoon, so dismissal would be delayed by half an hour, and parents should pick up their children at 5 o'clock. Staring at the words fire drill, I suddenly laughed, a real laugh, silent, with just a slight upward curve of my lips. In my previous life, no one had ever told us in advance what to do when a fire came. In this life, my daughter's school had scheduled a fire drill on the very day she almost died. Around 4:20, the sound of a car door closing came from downstairs. I glanced out the living room window and saw Gugoen returning. He stepped out of the back seat of a taxi, his dark blue cotton jacket sleeve stained with dark red blood that had already dried, forming a stiff, dark patch on the fabric. Instead of going straight home, he stood by the flower bed and took out his phone to type. My phone buzzed, a message from Gugoen with just 4 words. The hand was saved. I read those 4 words and turned off my phone screen. Good. That was the first piece of good news I'd heard today, but for me, the real good news wasn't that. For me, the real good news was that this string of firecrackers hadn't burned down anyone's house or taken any life that didn't belong to this child. It had simply done what it was designed to do, exploded in the hands of the one who lit it. It wasn't retribution, nor divine punishment, it was cause and effect. Cause and effect is fairer than retribution and more precise than divine punishment. It doesn't care about motives, only actions. If you light it, you bear the consequences. Being 9 years old isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card, and your mother's excuse, he's just a child. He doesn't know any better, can't stop the fire that ignites the fuse. The sky outside gradually darkened. I changed into my clothes, preparing to pick up my daughter from school. Before leaving, I did one thing. I took a sealed bag from the drawer of the wardrobe, which contained the original ordinary fuse extracted from the firecrackers at Sister Sue's house. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the gas stove, and held the grayish-white fuse over the flame. It burned with a sizzling sound, and blue smoke carrying the scent of sulfur rose up. Before it was completely consumed, I threw it into the sink, turned on the faucet, and washed all the ashes away. The last piece of evidence proving I had been on her balcony disappeared into the drain. I washed my hands, applied hand cream, put on my coat, and stepped out. As the elevator descended, I thought of Gugoen. His hands were saved, and he hadn't sent any other messages since, but I had a strong intuition that this veteran detective wouldn't stop here. In his past life, he had rushed into the fire to save people. In this life, seeing a child injured by an explosion, he would certainly not fail to inquire about the cause and effect of the incident. And that woman next door, who had played chess with him, added him on WeChat, lost 2 games to him, spoke little in his presence but every word counted, had likely been re-examined in his mind. Uncle Gu, I'm waiting for you to ask. The elevator doors opened, and a cold wind hit my face. I tightened my scarf and walked toward the school. The fruit shop by the road was lit with warm yellow lights. Sister Kai, standing at the entrance, saw me and waved. Holding up a plastic bag, Shaolin, I saved a box of strawberries for you. They just arrived today. When I took the strawberries, the plastic bag left a faint red mark on my hand. My fingers were warm. I had done so many things these past few days, held the fuse, used a card to pick the lock, and pushed the stone that sealed Sister Sue's family's fate. But now, what I held in my hand was a bag of strawberries. Strawberries my daughter would eat when she returned from school. I looked up at the sky. The clouds hung low, as if snow were about to fall. The first snow of this winter might fall tonight. Good, snow covers everything, clean and pure. For the first 2 days after Suhao's accident, the entire building was buzzing with gossip. Messages in the main group chat flew by faster than during the New Year's red envelope frenzy. Some said that although the child's fingers hadn't been amputated, his right index and middle fingers were comminutedly fractured. The doctor stated that even in the best-case scenario, his mobility would be limited, and he would never be able to write or hold chopsticks like a normal person. Others said that Sister Sue wailed all night in the hospital corridor, and the nurses came to persuade her 3 times but couldn't stop her. Some said that when her husband arrived at the hospital, his face was ashen. His first words upon entering weren't about the child's condition, but rather, "Where did the firecrackers come from? Where did they come from?" That's a good question. The firecrackers were bought by your wife. Do you believe I swapped them? But ultimately, it was your family that left that firecracker on the balcony for half a month. It was your wife who stood up for her son in front of everyone, saying, "Let him set them off. If anything happens, I'll take responsibility." Now that something has happened, you ask where the firecrackers came from. Go ask your wife. But I didn't say a word in the group. At times like this, the person who speaks is the most suspicious. I opened the group chat, glanced at it for a moment, and closed it. An hour later, I glanced again and closed it once more. I maintained silence, keeping pace with all the other neighbors. If others were shocked, I was shocked too. If others sighed, I sighed too. The next afternoon, I ran into Auntie Jo from upstairs in the hallway. Auntie Jo, in her 70s, lived on the 5th floor and had always been on good terms with me. After the fire in my previous life, she was the only neighbor who voluntarily brought meals to my husband. Leaning on her cane at the stairwell, she grabbed my hand as soon as she saw me, her eyes red. "Xiaoling," she said, "what a mess this is. I've watched that kid grow up. He was mischievous, sure, but who'd have thought it'd come to this? And his mother, too, never bothered to discipline him, and now all this crying won't change a thing." I patted the back of her hand without responding. You be careful too, your balcony is so close to theirs. Thank goodness the fire didn't reach you this time." As soon as she said thank goodness, Auntie Jo froze, likely startled by her own words, and quickly added, bad omens don't come true, only the good ones. It's fine, Auntie Jo, there's nothing piled up on my balcony." I smiled and helped her slowly descend the stairs, thinking to myself, you're right, Auntie Jo, thank goodness. But it wasn't luck, it was me clearing all the newspapers off the balcony 8 days early, spending 400 yuan to install a camera, and knocking on a neighbor's door in the middle of the night to replace the fuse for 20 minutes. There's no such thing as luck, only preparation. In my past life, no one did this for me. This time, I did it for myself. On the 3rd day, public opinion began to boil over. The local forum post was reposted on Weibo. Its title edited to read, 9-year-old boy loses finger in firecracker explosion. Mother previously said, even if it burns, it's no one else's business. The title was particularly brutal because every word of it was true. I wasn't the one who posted it. I hadn't logged into that account for 3 days. A forum user named Sisterly, the cilantro lover, had reposted it to Weibo with 3 screenshots, my original post, the property management's rectification notice, and a screenshot of Gu Guoen's real name comment in the thread. The Weibo post stayed pinned under local topics for an entire day and, by evening, had climbed to the tail end of the city's trending list, though it wasn't high, just in the 30s. For a neighborhood-level incident, it was explosive. I didn't need to look to guess what the comments were like. There were 2 main camps, those blaming the parents and those blaming the child, with the former dominating, because even if it burns, it's no one else's business was just too glaring. Anyone with basic empathy would see that and think the mother was either stupid, cruel, or both. There were also those who blamed the child. Some said, serves him right, this time he blew up his own finger, next time it'll be someone else's house. Harsh, but harsh words often hold truth. In my past life, when my home burned down, no one stood up to say serves you right. Now, it's your turn. On the 4th day, a television station arrived. Not a provincial satellite channel's livelihood news program that specializes in reporting on domestic squabbles, neighborhood disputes, and various social incidents. Their reporter set up a camera at the entrance of the residential compound. stopping residents as they entered or exited to conduct interviews. I saw this when I returned from grocery shopping in the afternoon, a young female reporter holding a microphone, followed by a cameraman. The female reporter stood beside the flower bed at the compound's entrance and stopped an elderly man who had just returned from outside, asking him if he knew about the incident where a child was injured by a firecracker explosion in the compound. The man, likely a retired teacher, spoke with careful diction, delivering a stern, 5-minute address to the camera. He stated that the essence of this incident was not an accident, but the inevitable result of parents' long-term indulgence of their minor children engaging in dangerous behavior. He said that the property management had repeatedly tried to dissuade them without success. Not only did the parents refuse to cooperate, but they also verbally attacked the property management staff. He added that many elderly people and children lived in this compound, and everyone's safety was under threat. Finally, he delivered a particularly striking remark. What if the firecracker had exploded in someone else's doorway? What if it had burned down the entire building? Who would be held responsible? The reporter nodded repeatedly and asked if she could broadcast this statement. The man placed his hands behind his back and said, "Broadcast it however you like." As I walked back carrying my grocery bag filled with vegetables, I deliberately took a detour to the building where my aunt had settled. His room was lit, with the curtains drawn halfway, allowing me to see his silhouette in the living room. He sat in his usual spot, with something spread out before him, not a chessboard, but rather a stack of documents. His back remained motionless. Occasionally, he turned a page, lifted a cup to take a sip of water, and then set it down. I did not disturb him. The task he was engaged in might be far more extensive than I had anticipated. On the 5th day, an unexpected twist unfolded. A little past 10 in the morning, Sister Sue's husband was summoned to the police station for questioning. The news came from Sister Kai. While she was putting mesh bags on oranges in her fruit shop, she lowered her voice and said to me, "Shaolin, you probably don't know, but it seems Sister Sue's husband is in trouble. People from his workplace came yesterday, spent over an hour reviewing surveillance footage with the property management, and then the police showed up this morning." "What workplace?" I asked. "Is he in freight transport?" "He's affiliated with a logistics company, but I heard he often takes on side jobs outside, using the company's vehicles to haul private cargo. He's been doing this for nearly half a year. A few days ago, apparently, a batch of goods had issues. The recipient couldn't reach Sister Sue, so her husband called the logistics company. The company checked and discovered he was using the vehicle for private purposes, and the accounts didn't match. Now the company wants to press charges, accusing him of embezzling company property. The amount involved seems quite substantial." After finishing her story, Sister Kai clicked her tongue twice and handed me the bag of oranges. "Don't you think this family has had 8 lifetimes of bad luck?" The child just blew up his hand, and now the man is facing a lawsuit. I took the oranges, maintaining a suitably surprised expression on my face, while thinking to myself, is this really just bad luck? The company in question is an established enterprise in the logistics park, and its management has always been strict and standardized. They have an internal whistleblowing system. Reports can be submitted anonymously through an online platform, as long as someone files a report, clearly stating the time, location, individuals involved, and the incident, along with relevant evidence or clues. The internal audit department will follow up. From internal audit to police report, it takes as little as 3 days or as long as a week. On the evening of the 6th day, an article appeared online, titled "A Family in Our Residential Compound," published on a local lifestyle WeChat public account. The author was credited as "a neighbor still shaken by the incident," written in the first person. The piece was highly immersive. It never mentioned real names, but anyone living in the compound would know exactly who it was about after reading it. The article began, "After this incident, I couldn't sleep for several nights in a row. It wasn't because I witnessed any terrifying scenes with my own eyes, but because I thought of a far more frightening possibility. What if those firecrackers hadn't exploded in that child's hands, but had been thrown onto someone else's balcony? What if the curtains on my own balcony had been blown open by the wind at that moment, and sparks had flown inside? I might not be sitting here writing this article, but instead sitting in a funeral home, clutching an urn." As I read this, I thought, every word this person wrote seems to be speaking for me, but as I continued to the 3rd paragraph, I confirmed, this wasn't written by me, nor was it arranged by me. I had interacted with that family before. This past summer, water leaked from my air conditioner's outdoor unit and dripped onto their clothes drying rack. The woman from that household came up to knock on my door, pointed at my nose, and said, "Your water is dripping onto my clothes, can you afford to compensate me?" I apologized at the time and paid for 2 shirts, but later, I discovered that their air conditioner's outdoor unit was also leaking water, dripping onto the windows of the first-floor residents. The elderly woman on the first floor went to confront them, but they never even opened the door. Instead, they shouted through it, "So what if it's dripping? It's not sulfuric acid." After reading this section, I put down my phone. The person who wrote this article wasn't incited by me, wasn't arranged by me, wasn't paid by me. He's just an ordinary resident in the neighborhood. The words that had been pent up inside for too long finally found an outlet. What I did, the post I made, the few words of support I offered, it was like pressing a switch. Once the switch was pressed, what poured out was what had been brewing in their own hearts. Sister Sue has offended too many people in her life. She thought she was being fierce, protecting her family, refusing to let herself be taken advantage of. She thought everyone had been silenced by her sharp tongue, too afraid to speak up, as if they had conceded and given in. But what she didn't know was that none of the neighbors she had bullied, harassed, or crushed with her "don't mess with me" attitude had forgotten. They were just waiting for the right moment. And the moment her son got into trouble became everyone's moment. At that instant, I realized this revenge was no longer just my own affair, it had transformed into something much larger in scope. The fuse I lit didn't just blow off 2 of a child's fingers, it blasted open a space that had been sealed shut for far too long. In that space, all the voices she had suppressed came pouring out at once. On the 7th day, Guguin invited me to play chess. His WeChat message came at 2 in the afternoon. Just one sentence, "Old spot at the Central Garden, bring it." I replied with one word, "Okay." When I arrived, he was already sitting on the bench, the small stool in front of him empty. The chessboard not yet set up. Seeing me approach, he pulled a cloth chessboard from the inner pocket of his cotton jacket, spread it out on the bench, and placed the pieces one by one. The red pieces were arranged on my side, and he said, "Sit down and make your move." My first move, cannon 2 to 5. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took out an old flip phone from his pocket, the kind with buttons, no internet, a typical senior's phone, and placed it on the bench next to the chessboard. Screen facing up, recording. He glanced at the phone, then at the chessboard, retreated a step with horse 8 to 7, and finally spoke. "Shaolin, I asked a kid from my old workplace for a favor and checked the surveillance footage from your building. On December 13th, at 11:52 p.m., someone in dark sportswear entered the door next to Building B. That person's build was very similar to yours. They lingered in the 4th-floor hallway for about 25 minutes before leaving the same way." He pushed his chariot forward 1 step, looked up at me. His eyes were a grayish-brown, probably sharp in his youth, but now aged and surrounded by wrinkles. Yet when he looked at someone, it still felt like a needle. "You need to explain this to me." On the chessboard, his chariot pressed against my riverbank. I lowered my head to look at the pieces, in no hurry to move. "Uncle Gu, you were the one who publicly supported that post under your real name. You also went to the interview downstairs. You helped me because you knew this wasn't just about a child getting injured by firecrackers, right?" He didn't speak, just tapped his finger lightly on the chariot piece, waiting for me to continue. "Suhao has been setting off firecrackers recklessly in the neighborhood not just once or twice. How his mother has treated the property management and the neighbors, you know better than I do." The property management advised him 3 times, the neighborhood committee twice, and every time he said, "Okay, okay," but never changed. Gugoin coughed, took a handkerchief from his pocket, and wiped his mouth. In his previous life, his lungs were ruined by thick smoke. In this life, his lungs are still intact, but when he coughs, the old ailment lingers. He folded the handkerchief and put it back. I looked into the supply chain of that batch of firecrackers. There are 2 shops in the alley behind the city god temple that sold the same batch. The owner of one of them admitted that about 4 days before the incident, a woman in her early 30s came to buy fast-burning fuses. She didn't look at me, keeping her eyes on the chessboard, but her back teeth clenched slightly. "Do you think what you did was flawless?" The spring breeze swept into the garden, lifting the corners of the chessboard. I reached out and pressed the raised edge flat, my fingers resting on the arranged pieces, feeling the cold stone slab beneath. "Uncle Gu, are you planning to expose me?" My voice was calm as I said this. Not the kind of forced calm, but genuine tranquility, because I had thought about this question before coming here. If such a day ever arrived, if an old detective uncovered all my secrets, what would I do? The answer was, nothing much. What is everything I did called in legal terms? Trespassing, not serious enough for criminal charges, at most administrative detention, modifying firecracker fuses. There's no explicit legal prohibition, just a violation of regulations at most, posting online to expose his family's affairs. That's freedom of speech. Everything I said was the truth. The law can't punish me, just as it can't punish him when he says, the child is young and doesn't know any better. There's a strange symmetry between these two things. Gugoin fell silent for a long time. He reached out and took the rook off the chessboard, but didn't capture my purple piece. He held the chess piece in his hand, turning it over and over. The piece grew warm from his touch, its surface gleaming faintly. I won't expose you, because I've remembered one thing you told me for a lifetime. He stopped turning the piece and looked up at me. Last month, I left a real name comment in the comments section of that post. After posting it, I regretted it, not because I was afraid of offending anyone, but because I felt I was too old to get involved in such matters. But that night, I had a dream. I dreamed that the firecracker the child lit didn't explode in his hand, but instead landed on your balcony. I dreamed of a fire breaking out, the entire building shrouded in black smoke, fire trucks unable to get through, and the hallways filled with cries and screams. He coughed, cleared his throat, his voice a bit hoarse. Guess who rushed in to save people in the dream? I didn't say anything. It was me. He pointed at himself, his finger pressing against his chest. I rushed in, but I didn't save anyone. Your door was locked from the inside, and I couldn't break it down. I just stood outside your door, listening to the sounds inside. His eyes turned red, not from crying, but that particular redness that comes with old age, as if sand had blown into them. He pressed his thumb against the corner of his eye, then lowered his hand. The age spots on the back of his hand looked especially clear in the afternoon sunlight. After waking up, I understood everything. Your post was written in such detail, dates, events, recordings, things an ordinary neighbor couldn't possibly know so thoroughly, unless you had spent a lifetime preparing to deal with this family. He was right, I had spent a lifetime preparing, an entire lifetime. I pushed the ginger in my hand forward a step. He lowered his head to look at the chessboard, his lips moving slightly, probably calculating the 3 moves I had made. Later, he brought up his own affairs to block me, then spoke in a tone slower than his chess moves. Shaolin, I called you here today not to interrogate you, but to tell you 2 things. First, the man from the Su family has been formally charged by the police. The amount of embezzlement isn't large, but he has a prior record. He was detained 5 years ago for intentional injury. This time, he might get a real sentence. Second, he didn't say it immediately. He fiddled with a chess piece, his eyes fixed on the board, his brow deeply furrowed, as if making a very difficult decision. Then he placed the book back in its original spot, conceded defeat, and pushed the chessboard away. Second, Sister Su is looking for people to investigate everywhere. I don't know exactly what she's looking into, but she told others she doesn't believe the firecrackers on the balcony could have exploded on their own. He said that box of firecrackers had been bought 2 months ago and nothing had happened until that day. It couldn't have just suddenly exploded. He suspects someone tampered with them. I slowly and steadily picked up the red pieces from the board, one by one. What could he possibly find out? He won't find anything. Gugoin stood up, folded the stool, and held it in his hand. But this matter won't be so easily put to rest. Before coming here, I went to my old workplace and chatted with the kid on duty. She said they've been investigating a batch of modified fuses recently. Someone's selling them near the city god temple. The shopkeeper's wife is loose-lipped and spilled everything as soon as she was asked. His eyes fell on my hands. She said the person who bought the fuses was a woman. The wind blew, and the withered branches of the parasol tree rustled overhead. We stood facing each other for a while, neither of us speaking. First, Shaolin, I'm old. I've seen many bad people and many good people, but there's one kind of person I've seen the least, the kind who've been pushed to the brink and come back to life. These people don't leave themselves a way out because they know what it feels like to have no way out. He shifted the stool from his left hand to his right. I don't want to become your way out, the wall that gets blocked off. But you have to promise me one thing. You said stop here. The firecrackers exploded. The child's hand was injured. Public opinion turned, and he took the medicine inside. Enough. Don't go any further. He emphasized the word enough heavily, not as an order, not as a warning, but as an old policeman's final judgment of someone's bottom line. He probably thought that if I kept going, I wouldn't be able to hold back, and I'd go from being a victim to a pure perpetrator. Slowly, I picked up the last piece and put it in the box, closed the lid, stood up, and handed the board and pieces back to him. Uncle Gu, what you said makes sense. I looked up and smiled at him, a sincere smile, with nothing hidden, because she was right. The cards already in hand are enough to nail Sister Sue's family to the judgment seat. A son injured and disabled, a husband about to go to prison, a woman scorned by the entire internet and forced to delete all her social media accounts. For many bystanders, that's enough, even more than enough, but for me, it's not enough. not because my desire for revenge is too strong, but because in my previous life, what I lost wasn't just anyone, not some abstract family member, but my daughter, my 7-year-old girl, and all the life she never got to live. Still, I accepted the look of relief on Uncle Goo's face. He needs to believe that I am someone who can be persuaded. Someone who knows how to keep things in check. Shaolin, you wouldn't lie to me. Would you? How could I, Uncle Goo? Who would dare lie to someone with eyes like yours? The old man grinned, picked up his folding stool, and turned to leave. After walking a few steps, he turned back and said, "By the way, come play chess with me another day." Sure. I stood where I was, watching his receding figure. His slightly hunched grey-blue cotton jacket blended into the colors of the shrubs behind the flower bed. Only after confirming he had entered the doorway of his own unit did I look away and turned to head home. On the way, I took out my phone to check the time. For 21 p.m., there were still 38 minutes until my daughter got out of school, so I could stop by the familiar print shop on my way home. As the phone screen lit up, a notification from the residence group popped up. Opening it, I saw a message from Sister Kai. Sister Sue's husband was just taken away by a police car. A lot of people downstairs saw it. Below were 7 or 8 replies, all ellipses and shocked emojis. I locked the screen, gripped the phone in my hand, and continued walking out of the neighborhood at a steady pace, like any ordinary, routine housewife in this world. But in my heart, I had already begun setting up the final domino. 3 days after Sister Sue's husband was taken away, a court seal was pasted on her door, not an official seizure, but a property preservation notice. White with black characters and stamped with the red seal of the district court. Sister Kai said it was because the logistics company had applied for pre-litigation property preservation, fearing he might flee, so they sealed the house first. That afternoon, after the seal was pasted, Sister Sue squatted by the door, trying to tear it off for a long time without success. That kind of seal uses special paper, tear off one layer, and there's still adhesive underneath. In the end, all she had left was a handful of shredded paper. She crouched on the ground, clutching the shreds, crying so loudly the whole building could hear. In my own home, separated by the wall, I listened to her cries seeping through the brickwork, muffled, like something struggling under a blanket. In my previous life, when my husband cried outside her door, her house was locked, long since empty. She never heard his cries, but in this life, I heard hers, every word, without missing a single one. I scraped the chopped green onions from the cutting board into a bowl and wiped my hands. My daughter was watching cartoons, the volume just loud enough to drown out the wailing from next door. My husband was scrolling through his phone on the sofa. He looked up toward the wall and asked, "What's going on next door again?" I said I didn't know. "Maybe it's a family matter." He grunted in acknowledgement and went back to his phone. At that moment, my home was quiet, whole, while all the brokenness next door remained separated by that wall. On the 8th day, a new recording began circulating online. It wasn't from my post, but an anonymous user on Douyin, claiming to be a former colleague of Sister Sue, uploaded an audio clip. In the recording, 2 women were talking against a backdrop of noisy machinery, like in a factory workshop or warehouse. One voice was Sister Sue's, complaining that her husband hadn't been coming home lately, saying he must be seeing someone else, while she was exhausted from taking care of the kids and doing housework. And he was out having fun. That wasn't the main point, the key part came later, when her voice suddenly dropped to a whisper, and she said something else in an extremely disdainful tone. "You know that family next door to us, Shaolin, the one with a daughter about the same age as my Hao? They had a pile of cardboard boxes stacked on their balcony. Just looking at it scared me. I thought to myself, if a fire ever breaks out one day, it's their own fault. I'm telling you, some people's fate is of their own making." At this point in the recording, the other woman chimed in, "But aren't you afraid your Hao setting off firecrackers outside might burn their place?" Sister Sue's reply came through loud and clear, each word hitting like a hammer. "So what if it burns? It's not like I told them to stack cardboard boxes. If they're careless, who can they blame?" After this recording was posted, the comment section exploded, or rather, the entire internet exploded, because the phrase "so what if it burns" felt like a knife stabbing into the hearts of everyone who heard it. Someone commented, "There really are people in this world who treat others' lives as a joke." Another wrote, "This isn't just being mean-spirited, it's pure evil from the core." Yet another said, "I used to feel a little sorry for her son losing his hand, but now I just think, heaven has eyes." Someone posted a long article on Weibo titled, "So what if it burns? Extreme indifference is another form of murder." The article was shared over 20,000 times. My phone kept vibrating as everyone in the homeowners group chat forwarded the same thing. No one spoke up for Sister Sue. anymore. Even those who had sympathized with her before fell silent. I sat on the sofa and listened to that recording over and over again, my finger pressing the play button, dragging the progress bar back and forth to replay those 5 words. So what if it burns? Her voice in the recording sounded so casual, so ordinary, as if she were commenting on the nice weather or the price of eggs going up by 2 yuan at the supermarket. My eyes didn't well up with tears, my fingers didn't tremble. I saved the recording to my phone in a folder labeled backup and set a password. Then I went back to peeling potatoes. The potato skins fell into the trash can in perfect, thin, unbroken spirals, one after another. On the 10th day, Sister Sue contacted me. She sent me a message on WeChat, a voice message. Even before I clicked to listen, I could guess roughly what it was about. She wanted me to help her with something, to get all the neighbors to support her side in the court of public opinion. Because of the things I had previously said praising her son and backing her family, everyone was now forwarding and screenshotting those messages, all the bold claims I had made in front of everyone back then, and now, her point was, since you were always supporting me back then, you should continue to do so now. After sending the voice message, she waited about 5 minutes and then sent a text message. Shaolin, I haven't treated you poorly before, right? The fruits and yogurt and such were nothing much. Our family is going through a bit of a tough time now. You can't turn your back on us now. I stared at the phrase turn your back on us for a long while, then put my phone down without replying. When evening came, I spent a dozen seconds typing a few words in response. Sister Sue, I shouldn't say too much about your family's matters. I'm deeply saddened by Hao's accident, but that box of firecrackers was placed on your own balcony. You should be clear about that. I wish you all the best. After sending it, I opened her moments and glanced at her last post, which was made before the recording was exposed. It was a photo of her son's hospital room, with sunlight spilling onto the white bedsheets. The caption read, "Get well soon, baby, mommy's here." It had over 20 likes at the time. Now, the comments section of that post was filled with question marks and accusations. Those who had liked it probably regretted it, several had already unliked it, while the rest might not have seen the recording yet. I closed the page and set her to chat only. On the evening of the 12th day, around 11 p.m., Uncle Gu knocked on my door. He wasn't the type to use WeChat or talk to me much, and he rarely visited on his own. When I opened the door, I saw him wearing his grey-blue cotton jacket, holding neither a chessboard nor a phone, his face almost expressionless. He stood at my doorstep and handed me something, an A4-sized craft paper envelope, unsealed, its edges already creased from his fingers. I took it and glanced inside. On top was a fire inspection report, headed by the city fire brigade. The text was very concise, describing a simple matter. At 3:10 p.m. on December 16th, an accidental firework explosion occurred on the balcony of room 401, Building B. The cause has been determined to be an abnormal fuse that triggered the simultaneous detonation of the entire firework set, with external human sabotage ruled out. I stuffed the document back into the envelope. Uncle Gu, thank you. It wasn't me, he said. I paused for a moment, thinking I had misheard. I came to tell you that I didn't do it. I went to the fire department to inquire about this, hoping I could get an internal explanation to complete the procedure, but they had already issued an official report stating that you had nothing to do with it. It was the neighbor's child who accidentally ignited a faulty fuse. His hands were tucked into the pockets of his cotton coat, and his back was cast in the light of my entryway. In other words, from a legal standpoint, the matter has been settled, and no one will pursue it further. He looked at me, his eyes grayish-brown. Age had made them somewhat cloudy, yet when he looked at people, there was still a forceful intensity that left no room to hide. What I want to tell you is the third thing. Last time, I mentioned 2 things to you, and this is the third. That man surnamed Sue from her family voluntarily confessed in a statement yesterday afternoon that he had been smuggling and transporting substandard fireworks and firecrackers since last year, and had been storing the goods long-term on his own balcony, which was completely unsafe. Uncle Gu spoke slowly, each word carefully filtered before leaving his mouth. In other words, those firecrackers weren't bought from Chenghuangmiao Alley, he brought them back himself. The faulty fuse on the substandard smuggled goods is the manufacturer's problem. This is now solid evidence. He is a suspect in the case, not a victim's family member. He emphasized the last 4 words, then let out a long sigh and said, "That's all, I'm leaving." He turned and walked toward the elevator. I took a step forward and called out, "Uncle Gu." He looked back, a faint smile appearing on his wrinkled face. "Don't thank me, I just looked into a few things, the rest is up to you." The elevator door opened, and he stepped inside. Before the doors closed, he spoke his final words. Through the narrowing gap, girl, it's about time to stop." The elevator descended, and I returned to the apartment, closing the door behind me. I leaned against the refrigerator and stood there for a long while. He said, "Stop," knowing I might still have other moves hidden. A man who had spent most of his life as a detective hadn't completely lost his instincts, but this time, he could truly rest easy. I placed the craft paper envelope on the dining table and sat down. The faint glow of my daughter's nightlight seeped through the crack in her door, and my husband turned over in bed, the quilt rustling softly. Down the hallway lay a deep, tranquil darkness. At this time in my previous life, I was already lying in the morgue. In this life, my refrigerator is making ice, the washing machine is drying clothes, and the sound of water flowing through the radiator is as gentle as white noise. I closed my eyes, letting the full weight of my body sink into the chair back. 15 days ago, when I first opened my eyes, my bones were filled with fire, and my mind held only one thought: blood for blood. I thought about making them taste the agony of being burned alive, about trapping their son behind a locked door, about returning every bit of suffering they inflicted on my family. But in the end, that great fire never ignited. The real fire wasn't lit on the balcony, it burned in the court of public opinion, in the judicial process, and in the ruins of their own lives. Her son is crippled, her husband is finished, and her own reputation is scorned across the internet. This family is shattered. What I lost will never return, and that fact won't change one bit because of their pain. My father won't sit back on the flower bed waiting to come home just because Sister Sue cries. My mother-in-law won't stand up again to knit a sweater for my husband just because she's being cursed online, and my daughter from that previous life won't grow up all over again. But the daughter I have now is alive. When she comes home from school, she tosses her backpack onto the sofa and shouts, "Mom, I'm starving." She'll laugh with a gap-toothed grin over a piece of milk candy. She'll touch my face with hands sticky from crafting, smudging my cheek, then giggle and wipe it with her sleeve. For her sake, I must move forward and not remain trapped in this revenge. But moving forward doesn't mean letting go. That's a lesson Guguin taught me. In this world, there are always people whose actions cannot be forgiven, whose debts cannot be erased. You don't have to do anything more, but you can't say it's over. To say it's over would be a betrayal of the suffering you once endured. On the morning of the 16th day, the property management removed the seal from Sister Sue's doorway. The property preservation order had expired, and the court had not renewed it. It was said that some kind of settlement had been reached with the logistics company. Though no one knew the exact terms, all anyone knew was that in the afternoon, a moving company's van pulled up downstairs. From my kitchen window, I saw Sister Kai standing at the entrance of the fruit store, looking up while cracking sunflower seeds. Her posture represented the attitude of the entire neighborhood, watching the spectacle, purely and coldly. No one stepped forward to lend a hand. Even the property security guards just leaned on their electric scooters, watching from afar as her belongings were carried down one by one: the sofa, the coffee table, the television, her son's toy box, and that microwave oven forever stained with grease. These things had once filled her home, but now, loaded onto the truck, they looked old and worn. She stood beside the truck, shouting loudly at the movers that bucks couldn't be crushed, her voice still as sharp as ever, but no one paid attention. The movers kept their heads down and worked. I put on my coat and took my daughter's hand to go downstairs. It was Saturday, and she had dance class. She wore a pink leotard, her hair tied into two little buns, bouncing as she walked. When we reached the ground floor, I saw Sister Sue standing beside the truck, holding a plastic bag with a few bottles of water and half a pack of open crackers, probably the last bits and pieces she had cleared from upstairs. Her hair was hastily tied up, with 2 strands of white hair escaping at her temples, far more than I remembered. She wore no makeup, and the fine lines at the corners of her eyes seemed carved deeper, as if by a knife. She saw me, her gaze sweeping over before settling. There was no anger in her eyes, no pleading, only a murky, indescribable something, perhaps regret, perhaps exhaustion, or perhaps a faint, newly sprouting understanding, an understanding of why the fuse of that string of firecrackers had suddenly gone out of control. An understanding of whether there was some connection she had never seen between the way the world treated her and the way she had treated others. Her lips moved slightly, as if she were trying to form words, perhaps wanting to say something. I didn't give her the chance. I smiled at her, not the polite, perfunctory, neighborly smile I usually offered, but a calm, cool smile, the same smile I had worn 16 days ago, standing on the balcony, watching that string of red firecrackers, knowing I had returned to the starting point of time. She froze, her lips parting and closing again. The plastic bag in her hand rustled in the wind but didn't slip from her grasp. She just stared at me. As if looking at someone she had never truly known, I withdrew my gaze, took my daughter's small hand, and walked toward the neighborhood entrance. It was an unusually sunny day. The sunlight fell on us, mother and daughter, casting a long shadow that stretched from the neighborhood's brick pavement all the way to the sidewalk. My daughter suddenly looked up and asked, "Mommy, why is that auntie moving?" I said. "Maybe she doesn't want to live here anymore." She asked again, "Will she come back?" I looked down and squeezed her little hand a little tighter. "No, she won't. In the last life, she moved away just like this too, in a panic, in a hurry, fleeing overnight. Last time when she ran away, the ruins of my home were still smoking, the dead of 7 lives from my family." She never mentioned a word of it, brushing it off lightly with the phrase the child was young and didn't understand. This time, she also moved away. But the ruins are now beneath her own feet. My daughter tiptoed and slipped her hand into my pocket. Finding a piece of milk candy, she cheered, but tore the wrapper too hard, and the candy fell to the ground. She picked it up, blew on it, rewrapped it, and held it up to my mouth. "Half for Mom, half for me." I said okay. The candy slowly melted in my mouth, so sweet it was almost cloying, but I didn't frown. This sweetness was the sweetness of being alive, the sweetness of something regained. It was a sweetness I had to spend 15 lives, no, an entire lifetime, to taste again. I kept that half of the candy in my mouth, holding my daughter's hand as we continued toward her dance class. Behind us, the engine of the moving truck roared to life, growing fainter and fainter until it was swallowed by the morning rush hour traffic. I didn't look back after hearing the story above. What are your thoughts? Feel free to share your opinions in the comments section. Looking forward to hearing from you. If you liked this story, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to my channel. See you next time.